By analyzing mitochondrial and Y-chromosomal haplogroups, we can reconstruct the migration patterns and expansion of early humans. This genetic evidence provides a detailed and scientifically grounded account of human history, mapping the peopling of the world from our common ancestors to the present day. Consensus agrees that the first peopling of the Americas started in South America. Consensus agrees that mitochondrial haplogroup D1 is the oldest one of all maternal haplogroups they admit to be Native American. Consensus agrees that mitochondrial D1 migrated to Asia. This migration of the oldest mitochondrial Native American DNA is exactly what you see on your screen right now. This is a clear proof of American origin, or in other words, this is out of the Americas, right on your screen. This migration from Native Americans to Asia, like Indonesia, China, Japan, Northern Eurasia with the ANE, Pontic grasslands, Mesopotamia, Scandinavia, and finally also to Madagascar and North and East Africa, etc., is not necessarily exclusively a result of rounding the North Pacific to the west, entering Asia and Eurasia, whether this would have been along some kelp route or over a land bridge. The Horn of Africa is located in Northeast Africa. It makes up the easternmost projection of the continent, protruding into the Guardafui Channel, Arabian Sea, and the Gulf of Aden. The region primarily includes the countries of Ethiopia, Eritrea, Somalia, and Djibouti. The Sami are indigenous people, with a homeland stretching across northern Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Russia's Kola Peninsula. For millennia, the Sami in Finland were nomadic hunter-gatherers and fishers who survived the harsh Arctic climate by deeply adapting to the local ecosystem. For thousands of years after the last ice age, the ancestors of the Sami lived as hunter-gatherers across vast stretches of the Scandinavian and Fennoscandian peninsulas, including areas much further south in Finland than their current territory. Genetic and archaeological records show that modern Sami possess a high percentage of ancestry from these ancient European hunter-gatherers. Their culture evolved over millennia of communal hunting, trapping, and gathering. The Sami clearly were there as mitochondrial M, but they were already present as the oldest Native American group D. We claim that mitochondrial M is a consequence of progression of Native American groups from A to L. Consensus claims it is of African origin, but there is no genetic history or evidence that supports this. It would also be illogical for Sami ancestors to have arrived exactly so extreme north, as first from Africa. The Sami have indigenous or Eastern morphologies and characteristics, not African ones. So claiming them to be of African origin is an empty dogmatic, almost absurd claim. Sami and Native Americans share a deep, ancient genetic connection through shared Paleo-Siberian ancestors who migrated from Northeast Asia thousands of years ago. This shared deep ancestry sometimes leads to superficial similarities in facial features or traditional, nomadic, hide-based cultural practices. However, the Sami seem like a unique indigenous group of Northern Europe, but as shown and proven, the Sami are of Native American origin. Extensive genomic studies have detailed how their distinct gene pool developed. The maternal lineages of the Sami include haplogroup D5 of the Amazon forest mitochondrial D, which by consensus are assumed to be of Asian and Eastern European origin. Yet, genomic studies and our illustration of their genetics have detailed that they originally were Native Americans or of American origin and how their distinct gene pool developed. What you see right now on your screen is Amazon Native Americans peopling the world with Native Americans. This peopling includes what we today call Mesopotamia and the Pontic grasslands. What you see right now on your screen is what Amazon Native Americans end up peopling with Native Americans, this when mitochondrial group D already had evolved all the way until mitochondrial group L. At the time of D1, there was no mitochondrial L yet. When the Neanderthals arose, they already carried mitochondrial L. Further, the Neanderthals rose in the Americas and not in Africa. So mitochondrial L, which consensus calls mitochondrial Eve, arose in the Americas. Mitochondrial L, which consensus calls mitochondrial Eve, arose in the Amazon forest, just like the oldest mitochondrial group and DNA D1. In other words, mitochondrial Eve was amongst Amazon Native American modern humans before it arose in the Neanderthals. The Amazon Native American modern humans with mitochondrial L, or the real Homo sapiens, migrated to Africa the same way as the other groups migrated towards Africa, which is not over the Bering Sea land bridge, nor along the so-called kelp route of the kelp highway hypothesis. Mitochondrial D2 is the only one that crossed Beringa, whether that was over land or over some kind of kelp route. You see that clearest with mitochondrial M. The spreading of M was over sea and in fact provingly across ocean currents. In other words, the spreading of M already was riding the ocean currents. We show you proof that the spreading of the Native American mitochondrial L also, and this long before M, also was riding the ocean currents. When the peopling already involves mitochondrial M, the Native American peoplings together already peopled the whole world. This includes what we today call Mesopotamia and the Pontic grasslands, but also the whole of Australia and the whole of Africa, including the San people in the southern part of Africa. The first group in line, or rather alphabetical sequence, that according to consensus followed up the by consensus accepted Native American mitochondrial haplogroups, is mitochondrial haplogroup E. Mitochondrial E is a mitochondrial DNA lineage predominantly found across maritime Southeast Asia, Oceania, and Taiwan. According to consensus, it is a descendant of macrohaplogroup M, which we think of as confusing. We do not mind this approach of consensus, because it does not prove anything wrong or unlogic of what we just illustrated and proved. That said, we see it as an attempt of consensus to distract from what is clearly visible and proven, which is a clear American origin of all humans, and the Native American haplogroups being well before the by consensus assumed mitochondrial Eve. Independent, the modern distribution of mitochondrial E reflects ancient Austronesian migrations. The distribution and frequency of haplogroup E includes several groups of the population Y, whose markers are carried in the highest frequencies by Native Americans, and exactly by Amazon forest Native Americans of the mitochondrial D1 groups. So after all, the information about this group further associated this early group with Amazon forest Native Americans and with the mitochondrial haplogroup D, which we claim is the ancestor of all humans, this instead of some African origin being the ancestor of all humans. Our claim is confirmed by consumer DNA tests that even point out the Amazon native tribes that represented mitochondrial D in populating the whole world, including modern Europeans. These same consumer DNA tests prove that these ancestor Native American tribes made extensive use of the westward Pacific Ocean current system, as well as of the eastward Atlantic Ocean current system. Mitochondrial F. The next group in line is mtDNA. Haplogroup F is a major maternal lineage predominantly found in East and Southeast Asia. It is associated with the early peopling of the continent and subsequent Holocene expansions. Mitochondrial G. The next mtDNA haplogroup, G, is a Northeast Asian maternal lineage that likely arose around 35,700 years ago. It is predominantly concentrated in East Asia and Siberia, with the highest frequencies found among indigenous populations surrounding the Sea of Okhotsk, the Japanese Ainu, and Mongolian, Tibetan, and Siberian groups. Mitochondrial G and Native American paternal haplogroups C and Q are overlapping populations in East Asia, Siberia, and the Americas, and they share geographical histories. This progress by means of mitochondrial haplogroups and in parallel of paternal haplogroups goes on and paints in the clearest fashion and in detail the whole human history and the peopling of the whole world, this clearly starting out with Amazon forest Native Americans.